Hello there, today me and Ben will be reacting to What If Boba Fett Joined the Bad Batch. Very interesting what if, for sure. This one was made by Pente Patrol Star Wars, so make sure to check his channel out down below in the description of this video. Subscribe to him, he deserves it, and check out the original video. Link will be down below in the description of this video as well. Show him some love, he definitely deserves it. He makes some awesome what ifs, and hey, without further ado, let's get right into the reacting.
Hello. Our story begins on Zaheth. The Bad Batch was on a mission for Sid after the departure of Echo from their group. They were already becoming increasingly tired of Sid, but they needed more money and she had a grip on them because of who they were. If they betrayed her, she could call upon the Empire and bring them more trouble than they already had. The issue for the Bad Batch was the fact that they were down a member and needed to work at the same efficiency as they had been when Echo was here. For soldiers, it was easier to adjust. They had done so when they lost Crosshair, and they would do the same here. But with Omega, it was difficult. She didn't want Echo to leave because they were siblings. She had an attachment to him, just as she did the rest of Clone Force 99. She wished that Echo would come back, but he was on his own mission and she was learning to accept that. Hunter was the most caring towards the situation, but it was clear, especially to Omega, that there was tension rising in the ranks of her brothers. They were all on edge. Maybe Omega missed something, but they were just a little more tense than they would have been otherwise. It was for a number of reasons, and Echo's departure was one of them. But the galaxy was becoming more stressful to live in. The Imperial banner was being raised across the galaxy, and they had to navigate swiftly and quietly to avoid detection and avoid being killed in the process. The current mission to Zaheth was really a simple one, and the travesty of the situation is, they were doing it for a couple days worth of rations. That's what it boiled down to at this point. They were doing entire missions just to eat. Hunter and the other adults of the group were able to keep the knowledge of this a secret, because they didn't want Omega to know how desperate the situation had become. She would have been understanding and they knew that, but there was no reason to put that pressure onto her. As per their instructions for the mission, they were delivering a shipment of whatever to Zygerians. They were doing some galactic expansion in the area, and because the Empire wasn't here, it'd be safe for them.
Oh, not these fucking slave fucking monkeys. You remember them from the Clone Wars?
Really?
Oh my god, that Zygerian queen was so weird too. She was like simping for Anakin. I hate
the Zygerians were working strenuously to compete with the new criminal empire called Crimson Dawn, but it was becoming increasingly difficult for them. Maul's new empire was spanning the Outer Rim, and the Zygerians were crumbling, especially after what was Republic interference during the war. Hunter, Tech, Omega, and Wrecker moved to the streets of the city. They kept their eyes peeled for any signs of trouble, but saw none. Instead of getting in their heads about potential enemies, they were trying to find the buyers. The Zygerians were tough to deal with, and they certainly wouldn't take kindly the clones. The Bad Batch moved quickly, and then they came to a corner of a building where they could hear a commotion. Hunter peeked around the corner and saw a couple of bounty hunters firing away at the Zygerians. They were in a shootout. Something Hunter noticed was the pistols being used by the smaller bounty hunter. They were Westar 34s, which were odd for just about anyone to come by. Hunter kept a close eye on all of them, and watched what seemed to be a young Mandalorian go toe-to-toe with the Zygerians. He was the last one through the streets, and instead of getting into the ship, he was clipped in the back of the armor. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. His father's helmet was still a bit loose on him, and so as he dropped, it fell off of his head. Boba turned back, and Tech immediately noticed that it was a clone. Hunter asked if he was a clone cadet, and Tech identified that he couldn't be. Clone cadets, while being able to be that age, had specific markings that made them slightly different from the original host. Tech's goggles zoomed in, and he was able to see that there was potential for the boy to be the original model for the Jango Fett genome, or in other words, Omega's twin sibling. Hunter and Wrecker looked back to Omega, who was just as confused. She knew that she and Alpha were one of the same, the only difference being the flipping of a chromosome, at least from a cloner's perspective. Omega never had any interactions with the boy who called himself Boba Fett, and she was the most curious out of the group.
I swear he just said Boba Fett. I swear he just said Boba Fett. Hold on, I'm gonna skip back. You need to listen, hold up.
Never had any interactions with the boy who called himself Boba Fett, and she...
Did you hear it?
It does sound like it.
Boba Fett.
She was the most curious out of the group of clones to see who it was. Seeing that Boba was getting shot at, she demanded that they help. They were reluctant, because they were supposed to be making money from the Zygerians, but because Boba was struggling, she decided to make the first decision. She pulled her bow out and turned the corner, opening fire and clipping a Zygerian guard. Hunter pulled her back around the corner and told her to stop, but it was too late. Boba saw that he had allies and got to his feet, grabbing his father's helmet and running into cover. Omega and the other Bad Batch members moved out to cover him. Hunter was reluctant, but Omega made the move. There was no going back from that. Once Boba got to their side, they started running. Due to the chaos, Wrecker tripped over his own feet by hitting Tech.
How the fuck do you trip over your own feet, my guy?
That they had were thrown from their hands and the box opened up, throwing the internal pieces across the street.
Oh, great.
Hunter looked down and he couldn't believe his eyes. Sid was selling the Zagirian chains for their slave empire.
What?
She had extra supplies around her part of town and figured she'd make a quick buck. The Bad Batch stopped and looked at the supplies, and within an instant, they realized that maybe Sid was wrong for them. Having them sell chains to the Zagirians was simple irony. Why would she, a person knowing the chains they had to break free from when escaping the Empire, make them sell imprisonment devices to one of the most efficient slavers in the entire galaxy? It was ridiculous, especially when they had Omega with them. But they didn't have time for that right now. They needed to get a move on. The Zagirians were coming for them. They darted around the street, firing backwards and making a run for the Marauder. When they got to it, they got in. Tech lifted off and flew away. As they made their escape, they were trailed by Zagirian fighters. Before Wrecker, Hunter, or Omega could get to the rear cannons, Boba was there, and he ripped through the vessels as they chased after the clones. He was quick on the weapons, tearing the Zagirians out of the sky as Tech pulled out of the atmosphere and jumped into hyperspace. Once they escaped Zahath, everyone congregated in the main chamber of the Marauder. Boba walked back from the cannons, and Hunter picked up Boba's helmet and handed it to him. The boy snatched it out of Hunter's hands and sat down on a seat. His face was worn. He aged terribly, but that was the gift of being a bounty hunter. Boba chased being like his father so much, but it would leave him a life of struggle, pain, and misery. He didn't know how much he didn't want that at the moment, but someday he would find how lonely of a life it would be. Tech was the first one to say anything as he asked the kid if he was Unit A0050, and Boba looked up with anger on his face. He asked the clone if they still referred to each other by their chain codes, and Tech shook his head, then said that perhaps he'd prefer to be referred to as Alpha. Boba rolled his eyes and told Tech that his name was Boba Fett. Omega could see the tension. Boba didn't want to be here. While Boba didn't hate the clones, he certainly didn't consider himself one of them. Unlike the Bad Batch, he didn't have genetic mutations. He had no accelerated age, he had no inhibitor chips, and especially, with the Bad Batch, he had no heightened skills due to genetics. Boba could see his relation with Omega, considering the cloners thought it would be best to have two types of the Jango Fett genome running around Kamino. It was just complicated when Boba disappeared after the Battle of Geonosis, for the Kaminoans at least. Boba put up a barrier that screamed, "Stay away," and the clones could all see that. None of them wanted this to be taken to a point of hostility, but they were trying to help. Hunter asked Boba where his ship was, and they would drop him off where it was so he could leave. He gritted his teeth and told them that his ship was just stolen from him by those bounty hunters. Boba was mostly irritated because of that, but being stuck around a bunch of his father's clones wasn't really helping him much either. Omega got up in the seat next to him and asked him if he was doing alright. He didn't really have a response to this, and told her that he just wanted to be dropped off so he could find a means of getting his father's ship back. Boba wasn't aware of Omega. She was of him. There was a reason for Boba's almost superiority complex towards the clones. Jango always instilled it into him that he wasn't like the other clones. To Jango, the clones were as comparable to droids as anything else. They were just an alternative method to building an army. Instead of metal, it was flesh. But to him, they were not the same. Boba adopted this ideology because Jango instilled it into him. The way Boba was treated around the other clones made him understand that he was his father's son, not his father's clone. Boba would regard Omega as the same, even though she was pretty much his twin. They were quiet for a good part of the journey through hyperspace until Omega was able to get some conversation out of him. He made it clear that he wanted to be dropped off, but he finally unveiled why he was hellbent on getting the ship back. It was his father's. The Bad Batch wasn't expecting undying loyalty from Boba, but a simple thanks would have been nice. As they returned to Ord Mantell, the Bad Batch told Boba that he could probably find some work with Sid. She was inside one of the local cantinas. Once they got inside, he could go wherever he wanted. The 5 clones made their way across the city without saying much of anything. Boba, before the door opened, thanked them for the ride. He expressed that he didn't care for all clones that much, but he had to learn to be an adult enough to be thankful. He was grateful that they saved him on Zahath. When they opened the door, they saw a couple Zygerians holding Sid hostage.
Oh, great.
She was furious that she'd been double-crossed, but Hunter took the stand. They didn't double-cross her. He told her that she was in the wrong for making them sell those type of products to the Zygerians. They escaped the clutches of the Empire, and she wanted to support the rebirth of a slave empire. For all they could care, she was a goner. Sid tried to get her way out of it by bartering, but the Zygerians were much less favorable than Roland Durand and his family. She realized that perhaps she double-crossed someone for the last time. Omega was the only one willing to see past it, and hoped that there was something better within Sid.
Oh my
But
god,
Hunter
just be quiet, alright? Sid is a bitch, alright? So shut the fuck up and just let her die.
pushed her back. This was for 2 reasons. Something was about to go down, and they definitely were not sticking their necks out for her again. The Zagirians were going to use her as leverage, but she had turned the clones against her. So, instead of getting their way with the clones, they executed Sid. Boba immediately pulled his pistols out. He didn't have as quick of a draw as his father or Cat Bane, but he was much faster than most in the galaxy. He pulled his pistols and fired away. The clones did too. The Zagirians dropped to the ground. Thanks to the loud commotion, more of them came in from the back. Tech and Omega jumped over the counter, while Hunter and Wrecker slammed a table down and used it as cover. Simply due to not working with Boba, they didn't notice how he vanished. The clones were able to cut down the Zagirians before making an escape back to the Marauder. When they arrived, they found Boba inside the cockpit. The little goober was trying to steal their ship.
Oh, wow.
When he turned around, he raised his weapons, but Wrecker ripped Boba out of his seat and held him up in the air. He demanded to know why Boba was so insistent on betraying his brothers and sister. Boba tried to escape, but Wrecker's grip was firm, and Hunter told the boy that they may have not been his brothers per se, or even from his perspective, but Omega 100% was his sister. He didn't understand, but it was true. Tech hopped into the seat and lifted off. He then tried to get in contact with Fee to see if she had anywhere for them to go. Wrecker put Boba down after he stopped squirming and negotiated his terms of surrender. Boba turned back towards Omega and asked her what they meant when they said they were siblings. She told him that the Kaminoans decided they wanted an unaltered clone for themselves. They were never allowed to interact with each other, likely for the purpose of secrecy from Jango, but they were twins in every single way. He talked to her as if Hunter and Tech and Wrecker weren't around them, and asked why she spent her time with this measly bunch, and she told him because they were her brothers. He refuted that, expressing that if she was just like him, then they weren't siblings with those genetic mutations. She was honestly disgusted by his rhetoric, but she couldn't blame him either. She knew more about Alpha than pretty much any other clone aside from the Bad Batch. She felt for him, and told him that even though he rejected it, she would like the opportunity to make him feel like he had a place here with them. If he wanted it, that is. The others in the group weren't against it, but they never thought Boba would be in for it, so it didn't really matter. While this was going on, Fee invited the clones to Pabu. It was a place where
I hope she dies. Cut her head off with a fucking lightsaber. She is so annoying. I hate her.
they could lay low for a little. Omega told Boba that he might feel disinclined to join them, but she said that she knew the bounty hunting life wouldn't be easy for him. He asked her how she knew that, and she simply told him that she studied Jango extensively with Nala Se. She told her everything there was to know about the donator of the clone trooper genome. Boba's temper dissipated, and then he settled down. He couldn't go anywhere, and without a ship, he'd be stuck. So why not wait until they got to Pabu to do anything reckless? Wrecker, Omega, and Boba were the only ones talking to each other throughout the duration through hyperspace. Hunter and Tech were in the front strategizing on how they would make it out of the situation. It'd be difficult, but they could make it work. Boba was actually coming around to Wrecker, the other two not so much. But Wrecker had this childlike innocence that was easier for Boba to handle. Aside from bounty hunters, Boba had very little interaction with adults that he could trust, so someone like Wrecker was easier for him to handle, and he actually kind of had a mutual respect for Omega, simply due to her being his legitimate sister. Boba never had much of an inclination to be concerned about the other clones like Kamino. He usually frequented with Tan Wei, but she was killed on Boravio by Fennec Shan. Boba knew of Fennec, but he was much more familiar with Cad Bane, considering he and his father were relatively close with each other. Regardless, by the time they got to Pabu, Boba had opened up a little. He learned of the other members of the Bad Batch and he actually respected them. Not as equals, but their determination to stay alive, because that was his exact same predicament. So he could at the very least understand them and honor their ability to stick by each other. He had no one, aside from Bosk, who took care of him throughout the Clone Wars, but they were separated before the incident.
Bro really got babysitted by a fucking lizard. God.
On Zahath. When they reached Pabu, Boba didn't really know how to handle anything. It was all peaceful. He never had that, aside from the time he had with his father. Jango prepared Boba for a life of bounty hunting, even though he never wanted Boba to have such a life. The welcoming on Pabu was also really bizarre. Mayor Shep Hazard was very kind, and then there was a little girl who was Boba and Omega's age, named Alina. They were able to go about with the mayor and join him for a small feast. Boba enjoyed, just as the other Bad Batch members did, eating food that wasn't rations. It was almost perfect, but Boba didn't want to lower his guard. He was very on edge, but there was no need for that. Pabu was a safe haven for refugees, and it would remain that for as long as they could continue to maintain it. At sunset, Lina would take Omega and Boba out on the water to enjoy the views. Due to their arrival, there wouldn't be any natural disturbances to add any tension to their little endeavor. That would come later. Instead, Boba would have to consider a lot. He never got to hang out with kids his own age, because clones always had accelerated aging, so why get attached to someone that would be an adult in a year or two? He was mostly alone, and now having learned of not just Omega but the Bad Batch, he felt like the Kaminoans had robbed him of a childhood. All of this was very internal. His emotions on the exterior were as neutral as they were when he first met the Bad Batch, but he felt the call to want to be with them. For the next couple of weeks, they would stay on Pabu. There would be a disturbance that would cause a tsunami, but it would be one of the most defining moments of Boba's life. He'd see the importance of not just brotherhood, but camaraderie and compassion. He finally cared about the other clones and his sister. It was still hard for him, though. He had to undo years of conditioning, but the format that changing hatred is by showing love. It's the strongest antidote to negativity. Boba was finding himself actually caring for these people that he simply regarded as genetic mutations. The fact that they were willing to see past that for the sole purpose of caring for him was incredible. They had, at least from his perspective, no other intentions. They simply were taking care of him because Omega was willing to care for him. They were a family, and Boba yearned for that for longer than he could remember. Now, it was sitting in front of him. Hunter promised that once things cooled down, they'd take him back to Ord Mantell and get him a ride to wherever he wanted. Considering, as it turns out, Boba stole credits from Sid's room when the Zygerians attacked.
Wow, bro, really stole credits from her? God.
Hunter and the rest of the batch were perfectly content with letting Boba use that to find his father's ship. And while Boba had an adoration for the vessel, he didn't want to risk the potential of these relationships for an object. It was a bounty hunter's vessel, and he wasn't even sure if he wanted that anymore. But there wasn't any time for thoughts like that. The batch recovered information and coordinates to a secret Imperial facility. Due to timing, Crosshair was able to get the coordinates of Mount Tantus out to them. He was warning them that the Empire was looking for Omega. Despite his attitude, he didn't want anything happening to her. The batch was willing to try and find Crosshair. It could be a trap, but he sounded like he was rebelling. Perhaps they could save their brother, and they drafted up a plan. It involved the help of some old friends, too. By this point, Rex had a network of clones, and if the Empire was trying to use clones for experiments, then it was worthwhile for them to be a part of such a mission. The plan was devised and put into action. During the transport of a larger scientific model, the clones would hijack an Imperial vessel, killing and dropping out of an airlock about 100 stormtroopers and a couple clone commandos. The commandos were too far gone, and so they were tragically dealt with. Rex had saved thousands of clones since the Clone Wars ended, but there were a little more than 100 volunteers that joined them. These included Rex, Echo, Cody, Fireball, Nemec, and Hauser. The clones were ready to strike back at the Empire, especially for what they did and had done to their brothers. This was a revenge mission more than anything else for many of these clones, but the point was not lost. They needed to recover the captured clones first. Mount Tantus was an incredibly large facility, and the issue the clones had was the fact that the TK troopers had different armor. Their ranks were littered with tall and short male and female troopers, so the clones had to try and fit in, literally, to their armor. But they were able to accommodate themselves for this mission. It was an undercover mission, which is why they needed the Imperial armor. The only unit that wasn't outfitted with TK armor was the Bad Batch. They'd be hiding inside of containers that were being transported into the facility. The Bad Batch squad included the Batch, Omega, Boba, Cody, Echo,
Bro, what? What is this?
and Rex. When they got into the facility, everything was silent. The clones carried out their directives while wearing TK uniforms. It was all meant to be a silent but successful mission. The Bad Batch would be the only ones making all the noise. Once transported to their drop-off location, the Bad Batch broke out of their cases and then moved out of the area. They had their weapons set for stun at the moment, due to the need to stay quiet. They avoided running into clones and TK troopers. Boba by this point was donning armor that looked like the rest of the squad, having changed all the colors on it and everything. The Bad Batch found the cells where the clones were being capped, and they quickly found the locks and broke them open. The clones had been treated terribly. Crosshair was one of them. They were all terribly shaken, but they found their brothers. Also, not for nothing, Crosshair wasn't the most welcoming individual, but they didn't care. All they wanted was to get him off of this planet and away from the Empire. He looked worse than ever before, which is why they were so adamant on doing so. When he asked why they came for him, Omega was the first to speak up, as she told him that he was their brother. It wasn't the easiest thing for Crosshair, but both he and Boba found true appreciation in the dedication this squad had for their brothers. It wasn't something easy to come by in this galaxy, and Boba started to realize what he missed out on due to a superiority complex towards the clones. Anyways, they informed the other clones that they were in the clear, and the trap laid was set in the action. The entire facility opened up in the blaster fire. As it did, a number of explosions were blown across the facility. The clones turned on the stormtroopers, and they realized at this precise moment there was never a better trooper in the galaxy than the clone trooper. The stormtroopers retreated and were pushed back. The explosions rocked the facility and a battle broke out. Though what confused the stormtroopers and commandos the most was the fact that the clones were wearing stormtrooper armor, so they were impossible to distinguish. But the clones moved in squads led by a captain or commander, so they all had an idea of where the other clone squadrons were. After all, tactics used by clones were much different compared to those used by the Empire. The commandos were struggling too. Despite their better armor and their advanced training, they were blindsided. Many of them were killed in explosions as well. On the backside of the facility, the Bad Batch was making its escape. They were going to run along the outer edge of the facility and use it to get back to their ship. The turbo lasers had been disabled, so the Empire was entirely reliant on its troopers. That was a touch from Echo, due to his bad luck with turbo cannons. The Bad Batch moved out. The squad ran deep with some of the most advanced troopers in the galaxy. Boba and Omega kept close to each other and were followed up by Tech and Echo. Their squad blasted down clone commandos and stormtroopers with little effort, until they came across a barricade that needed to be broken. Crosshair suggested Plan 32, which they had used during the war. Wrecker loved this one so much, so he reached into his backpack and grabbed as many droid poppers as possible, and launched them around the corner. Boba didn't know what was going on, but his sister grabbed his wrist and told him to keep close. They couldn't be a second late. Once the poppers exploded, they ran out from behind cover, and Wrecker charged the barricade. If they didn't get past the barricade, they'd be trapped. The massive clone slammed his body against the middle and it caved in, crushing Scorch under a massive piece of metal. The rest of the commandos and troopers were dispersed. At the same time, Tech, Crosshair, and Rex moved out the left side behind Wrecker, firing away using a pincer maneuver to cripple the clones. On the other side, Hunter, Cody, Echo, and the kids ferried out, blasting away, and carving out an escape route. This was incredibly important. There were other groups of clones inside the facility that were coming along the same path as a Bad Batch, and this would provide them the access to their escape craft. The Empire couldn't lose a facility, and so Dr. Hemlock, inside the control room, released everything he could. Any experiment that was considered deadly was sent out to hunt down the clones.
Bro, this motherfucker's straight crazy. Bro just released like dragons and fucking dogs to get them. God.
It was a harrowing experience, but the clones worked with each other, eventually rounding up. Before they could get to their ship, the troopers in the control room were able to get the turbo lasers turned on. This would be troublesome, but for the wrong side. The clones saw the weapons powered up, and eventually entered them. As they made their escape, the clones came together in one massive push for their escape vessel. The stormtroopers were no match, but they sandwiched the clones in between their only way out and the facility itself. The Bad Batch were able to draw fire, but there were more and more troopers coming their way. The clones needed to act quickly. Just as they did, a clone shoved Boba out of the way, saving him from a rocket that completely decimated the clone trooper. It was a sacrifice, one that Boba never thought the clones capable of, at least not for saving someone like him. All the troopers fought together. This was their final stand against the Empire, one that would bring an end to the Emperor. If they could escape, then it could be done right. But there were more troopers coming, and because of the blockade around the vessel, they couldn't get to it. Thanks to a couple crafty clones from one of the siege divisions, they were able to scale the outer wall of the facility and steal the turbo lasers. This would be the defining moment of their escape. They opened fire on the stormtroopers and blew them all to hell. The clones made a push for their vessel, getting all the injured and experimented clones inside before the able-bodied clones got themselves in too. The turbo laser troopers blasted the entire facility as best as they could before getting inside the ship. As it flew away, Wrecker was given the detonation device, and he triggered it, sending Mount Tantus into a massive explosion, destroying every piece of equipment, killing every trooper and scientist, and leveling the entire mountain. All the clones would return to Pabu. Some of them decided to end their fight there, and many more ready to return to the front lines of combat for their brothers. Echo would say goodbye to the Bad Batch again, as he would join Rex and the others on their fight against the Empire. Boba would be jittery with excitement for the success of their mission, and he believed he finally found a home, especially since he and Wrecker enjoyed blowing up Tantus so much. The dynamic with Crosshair would be difficult to manage for the Bad Batch, but the family reunion would be one of joy and peace. The happy part would come later, but for now, they wanted to just enjoy the company of each other. Boba would have time with Omega to thank her for being the best family he'd had in a long time. She was the one who gave him a home with the Bad Batch, and he'd be eternally grateful for it. Despite how antsy he was to go out into the galaxy, he would find peace here on Babu. Tech and Fee would also find their own joy, having their own marriage in a couple years
No! No, I hate her!
after the Tantus
Fucking
incident. Their child would be a musical mastermind and a genius. Despite the Bad Batch calling it quits on the war, the effect of their work would be generational, just not seen within their own lifetimes. Omega and Boba would see it though, each of them growing up before Tech, Wrecker, Hunter, and Crosshair's eyes. Omega would find her own spouse and Boba would be content with his childhood crush, the one he found when he first arrived on Pabu, eventually marrying Lana Hazard. The Tantus incident didn't become relevant until after the Battle of Endor. The projects hidden within the facility were personal to the Emperor, and they set him back decades. So much so that the pride of the Imperial Science Division was the creation of Dathan Palpatine, a boy that would eventually be able to escape from Exegol and find love in his own life. When the second Death Star was destroyed over Endor, Palpatine essence transferred, but never landed. The clones on Exegol weren't able to hold him, and instead of crippling him, he died, suffocating on the icy ground of a Sith temple. It was a pathetic death, but one fitting for a being of such evil. What the Bad Batch and several volunteer clones did for the galaxy would save the galaxy from the rise of Snoke and the First and Final Orders. It would save Ben Solo from being corrupted by the evil Darth Sidious, and it would allow a dyad to form between Ben and Rey without a war
fucking kill her! Cut her head off!
Dividing the galaxy. The last of the Empire would be defeated with Grand Admiral Thrawn, when he fell victim to Hera Syndulla and the New Republic at their final engagement. Omega and Boba would watch the galaxy change around them, as they remained the last two clones of Jango Fett. It was painful, but they both had each other, and as siblings, that was everything. Because it wasn't sadness when it came to an end. It was happiness for all that was shared between each other over the duration of an entire lifetime of being twins and watching the galaxy change for the better. That, my friends, is our wholesome story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett clone.
That was interesting. What do you think, huh?
Yeah. Wasn't bad.
I just think it was kind of like weird that he ended it. They went to Mount Baboon, whatever the fuck that place was called, and then he just started rambling on how just about the rest of the time, how the Empire ends and the First Order and going into the sequels. He didn't have to do that.
No, I think that broke it down a bit for me, so I had to say 8.5.
8.5, yeah. Agreed. But the whole story was good, I think. Even though we thought that it would make more sense for Boba to join the Bad Batch after Jango died, but he did now, and it still turned out good. So.
Alright, so that'll be it for the reacting. Pretty good what if. Like always, check out Pente Patrol Star Wars in the description, link to his channel, and link to the original video down below in the description of this video. He deserves to be shown some love as he makes awesome what ifs, and we'll definitely be reacting to some more what ifs pretty soon made by him. Subscribe to me as well, as we're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. Like the video, turn notifications on, and hey, that's all I have for you guys for today. Thank you so much for watching. This is the way, and may the force be with you. Then I will see you next time.
Hey, you didn't watch it? Well, check out the video on the left side of the screen, which is specifically recommended for you, or check out the playlist on the right of the screen, which contains similar videos to this one, made by me, of course. Hey, remember, subscribe.